Hi, welcome. My name is Leandro. You can call me Lekobi. I'm been a friend for the Swiss Army community and been involved with the open source community since 2013. And I'm very pleased to have you here, John Maddog, Vicky Brasseur, and Dorothy, please. And if you are okay, we can start with the questions from the audience. Okay. First question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Why should I spend my time with free, open source, and hardware and culture? Why should I spend my time, or the audience should spend their time doing free, open source, or open hardware, or contributing to the free culture?
So who would like to start?
Please.
Vicky, if you would like to, go ahead.
I'll dive right in. So it's more a question of why wouldn't you at this point, frankly. I mean, all of technology is based on free and open source software in some way at this point. All of the cutting edge work is happening in free and open source software. And it really is that rising tide that lifts all boats. It enables not only companies to create and deliver great value to their customers more rapidly and in a more secure manner, but it allows you to get so much more knowledge and experience in things that can help you move your career forward. And free hardware is just, it's at the starting edge. We've got things like RISC-V or RISC-V, depending on how you pronounce it. And it's looking very, very promising. And it's going to, we've had free hardware for a long time, but RISC-V is blazing trails and really opening doors that had been closed so far for free and open source hardware. So it's really the greatest time right now to be getting involved with free hardware, because now you can be in on the ground floor and you can learn things and help to make a bigger difference right now. And who would like to tag on to that?
Dorothy,
do you have anything?
Yeah. I think that you hit the nail on the head in terms of getting experience. I'm not sure exactly what kind of audience we have in front of us, but if you are looking...
Our audience is just beginners, all newbies, so please expand.
Well, great, and welcome to the family, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
The fact is that when you are going to find a job in technology today, they are not usually looking at your certificates. They are looking at your experience. And so joining the open source community is a wonderful way to actually get experience on projects, because that's what people are looking for. You can do your own scanning within your environment and check what kind of technologies are employers looking for. What do they expect me to have experience on? And then you go into the open source communities and you make sure you join projects that are using those kinds of technology. I used to head up a technology training institute, and many people in human resources who are not experienced would say, oh, do they have a master's degree? Those kind of organizations that are looking at certificates are not going to usually be the kinds of organizations where you will grow as a professional, because obviously they don't know much about tech. Tech is constantly changing. And so while I said yes, for your entry-level job, let's make sure you have some exposure to projects, specific projects, so that people can see that you know what you're talking about when you say that you know a particular technology. Just remember that throughout your career, you're also going to have to be learning constantly about new technologies, just the way Vicky was describing in terms of open hardware. But there's always something new happening. And if you want to be a top professional in technology, you must actually understand and you must actually participate actively in open source communities. But for beginners, let me say that the wonderful thing about it is you can lurk. So if you're not feeling confident right now to start making a contribution, you can be watching. And that's the beauty of it. You watch how people are pulling together a project and learn. And then when you feel a little bit confident, maybe contribute a little bit of code here, perhaps do some checks so that you're checking other people's code. But whatever you're doing, you will be learning and you will be acquiring the skills that you need. And I think maddog, you have given so many great lectures on this particular topic, so I think you can come in here.
Well, I might add that a lot of people look at, their desktop, their laptops and things, and they say, oh, all these people are using Windows or all these people using Apple products. But when you take a look at the enterprise market, the companies and stuff that drive the world, you find out that more than half of the servers that they use are running GNU Linux. Okay, all 500 of the world's fastest computers, what we call high performance computing, all 500 of them run Linux, and the same Linux that you would put on your laptop or your small device. The majority of smartphones run Android, which is based on the Linux kernel. And GNU Linux is the most used operating system for embedded system designs. So all this means is that there's a huge demand for free software people out there, open source people, particularly with the Linux system, but also with BSD, the Berkeley operating system. And that's another nice thing about free software. It's not just about the operating system. It's about database engines. So for example, you could use an Oracle closed source database engine, and you could learn how to use it to solve problems. But you don't know how Oracle actually solves the problems. You can't change it because you don't have the source code. So you could use MariaDB, or you could use Postgres, or you could use CouchDB, or Firebird, or any number of other open source and free software databases. You could use LibreOffice instead of Microsoft Office. And this way you get to see how the Office package works, as well as using it to do your presentations, to do your documents and things like that. So these are ways that you can get started. And it's also reasons why you should be using free software.
So
No, I want to build on that if no one minds, because while you should use free software, there's still lots of room in everyone is welcome in free and open source software. So if you do use Windows because that's what you have, right? Or that's what your employer requires you to use. If you do use Mac because that's what you prefer, it's okay, right? It's totally fine. There's lots of room out there for you still in free and open source software, because every piece of software out there has open source inside of it. And as well, when's the last time you saw a closed source programming language? They just don't exist. I mean, there are closed source operating systems now, but as maddog pointed out, those aren't the ones you're going to see deployed all that often. There's a reason why Microsoft is all about Linux right now, and that's because that's what people want. People are asking for them to deliver solutions on Linux, because it is the way people get things done in the enterprise, in the world, in science, in technology, in governments. It's all run on Linux. And it's really very powerful in that way. but all the pieces that go on top of that, those are also free and open source. So it's just the entire stack. It's free and open source all the way down. And it's really wonderful to see all the different options that are available to you. So no matter what you're interested in, there is something out there for you in free and open source software. And if you are not a programmer, there is so much that you can do to help in free and open source software and to be a vital part of that community. And it's not simply documentation, although documentation is amazing. Don't get me wrong, nothing is the amplifier of a project quite like documentation, but you could do security, you could do system administration, you can do project management, you can do design, accessibility, translation. There are so many different ways you can make a difference in free and open source software without having to write a single line of code. There's really, free and open source software truly is for everyone.
So, and let me just say, the bottom line is if you get the skills by being part of the community, you are going to command a higher salary than those who don't. And I think that for many people, this is very important. The world has a huge shortage of people with the right skill sets. And meanwhile, as my two fellow panelists have explained, these are the technologies that are being consistently deployed in all sectors. They're looking for people. Be that person.
So we can say that open source, open hardware, and free culture is everywhere. We can say it for sure. And contributing is a good way to learn experience. So we encourage to our audience to contribute.
I'd like to say one more thing.
Of course.
Since the bulk of this audience right now is outside of the United States, it's outside of China, it's outside of Western Europe, your government and your companies are sending billions of reais or pesos or things, whatever your currency is, out of your country and putting it to proprietary software which is produced in the United States or Europe or China. Same thing with hardware. If you start to use free software, then those billions of reais or pesos or whatever you have stay inside of your country and create jobs for young programmers like you or young users like you. It reduces the cost of your products overall. And so what this means is that, and every peso or real that stays inside of your country gets paid to programmers. Those programmers then buy local food, local housing, and pay local taxes. And the money keeps going like this. But as soon as that money leaves your country, you might as well kiss it goodbye. So from a country standpoint, from a society standpoint, it's better to produce this locally than utilize it from a company far away.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, let's move to another question. Regarding the information about the free open source, open hardware, and free culture, where our audience can gather more information, more beginner information?
Vicky, would you lead that again?
Well, my answer is a little self-serving because there's only one book aimed at beginners to the free and open source software community, and I wrote it. And if it's not available in your public libraries, please ask them to buy it. If not, you can get it yourself. It's also available for free at openlibrary.org. If you don't wish to buy it, you can get a library card at openlibrary.org and check it out. But of course, my publisher would prefer you buy it. I, however, love libraries. So it's called Forge Your Future with Open Source. And I feel it's a really good resource for this because it goes into a lot of the unwritten rules of open source that maddog and Dorothy and we had to learn the hard way. And there's no reason why you should have to learn it the hard way. So, why do people get really cranky about tabs versus spaces? How do you use a mailing list appropriately? What are some of the things you should anticipate with code reviews? That sort of stuff that is really important to having a healthy free and open source software project, but also a very healthy community. And how that can help you move forward in your career, and how to find the right project that's just perfect for where you want to go as an individual, rather than just going for, so often when I talk to people who are new to free and open source software, their first question is something like, how do I contribute to Linux? I'm like, whoa, pull it back a little bit. You would be contributing on hard mode if you're trying to contribute to Linux. Maybe there's something that's an easier lift where you can start to make a difference in a much larger way in a smaller project, where you know the domain really, really well. If you play guitar, if you're a knitter, if you like automotives, if there's something for everyone out there, where if you're really interested in something in your non-technical life, you can find a free and open source software project about it. And then because you know so much about it outside of that, you can then make a bigger difference to that project because you already know the domain and you don't have to take the time to learn it. And that's a really good way to start to think about, where do I want to go? What do I already know? What would I like to learn? And what projects are out there that can help me move forward in that way? And it was really important to me to make sure to include that in the book, because it's one of those questions I've gotten just so much for so many years. And I think we're really doing a disservice to people by not providing those answers and not helping them select the right thing.
Something?
Anytime.
Does your book, do you have your book in Portuguese?
It is not currently in Portuguese. It is in English and it is in Korean.
Okay.
The translations are handled by my publisher. So if anyone knows a publisher that would like to take on a translation of it in Portuguese, I'm happy to introduce them to my publisher, because the more languages we can get this translated into, the easier it is to bring in more people to free and open source software and to help them get started correctly.
Vicky, we'll talk offline.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that has to happen as fast as possible. Do you know whether the license would allow the community to translate bits of it?
It does not, because the publisher does have the license to it and they have the copyright to it. It's the only way to make the book happen.
Okay.
Which actually, because my publisher they really are amazing and they try to do the right thing all the time. I trusted them with that. And so they're willing to work with people, but they also are, they're a publisher. They have to pay people and, keep the lights on. So I respect that.
Yeah.
It's all a balance, right?
Yeah.
We
but
already.
I think it's
We'll
really
talk offline.
important. Yeah.
We
I
already.
think
We
I
need
think that you don't have
delay.
to. Pardon?
No, the delay is doing us a joke. So I was saying that in Spanish too, not only in Portuguese. It's a great book, by the way, Vicky. I read it, and it's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. We should talk offline. Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just thinking that there are many communities where people are already participating in different languages. I'll let maddog come in, but for example, many of my students found it useful to go to SourceForge and just look at different projects and use the approach that Vicky was talking about, looking for something that they're already familiar with in terms of domain knowledge and seeing if they can contribute. But the other thing is that even if you're a beginner, you can actually start up a project on one of those communities and invite people to join you, and you can learn that way as well. And of course, if you are doing the project, you do it in your language. I know in Brazil, for example, I'm speaking to you from Ghana in Africa, but I know that at one point we were really enjoying the open source solutions that had been put on the government of Brazil's website, which were solutions that were being used in the public service. For example, an HR solution or a solution for putting up a government website, et cetera, and all of those were both in Portuguese and in English. So because we speak English, we were looking at the English versions, but of course, many people listening speak Portuguese, so they could access the Portuguese.
Yeah. Just let me ask you another question. The audience here is wondering. Ah. Estamos teniendo algunos problemitas de internet. Normal en el tercer mundo. No pasa nada. A ver. We are having some technical problems. Estamos teniendo algunos pequeños problemitas técnicos, así que vamos a ir una tanda, así arreglamos todo y ya volvemos. Bueno, estamos de nuevo acá, ya arreglamos todo, enchufamos todo lo que teníamos que enchufar y continuamos. Please, continue. Dorothy, you were saying.
No, I think I was saying.
Oh, no, sorry, maddog.
So what I said was that if you're just starting off in free and open source software, that internet search engines are your friend. So you can try typing in, even in your own language, beginner's books on Linux or beginner's books on free software. Most of the major distributions like Red Hat or SUSE or Debian have a lot of beginning documentation of how to use their systems written in various languages. Also, I think Vicky mentioned, or no, maybe Dorothy mentioned, I can't remember who, going to the library. Either your university library or your public library, and looking for books there. There's lots of magazines that are also available and webzines that are available. Also, there are YouTube videos, very good ones, about how to start off with installing free software that can, get you on your way. And you could actually attend a conference such as Nerdila by Swiss Army, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. That would be a very good place to come, meet other free software users, and get help in getting started.
Yeah, there's lots of really great opportunities out there for conferences. There's the Siegel conference, as a matter of fact, Seattle GNU Linux conference, which is entirely online. It is on Pacific time zones, so the West Coast of the United States, but it's entirely online and it's entirely run on and served up with free and open source software. Just another way that you can see how free and open source has helped our world is that they're able to put on an entire conference using free and open source software. And all of those videos from their conference then go onto Internet Archive rather than a proprietary and very commercial data-driven solution like YouTube. They put them on Internet Archive where they are available for everyone in perpetuity with absolutely no ads, which is really great. And that means you can also find solutions and resources on Internet Archive. So if you would like to do that, that's another opportunity for you to find stuff.
So don't be lazy and look. That's
well, I mean, lazy. No, it's just it's kind of like it's not lazy not to get started, because as a writer, I know a blank page is the most terrifying thing, right? You just don't know where to start, and really, that's all you need sometimes is for somebody to say, "Hey, have you looked at? Have you considered? Maybe if you do." And that just gives you this little seed that you can plant. And you can then nurture that into a lot of knowledge. But if you don't even know where to start, that's not laziness. That's human nature. That's okay.
Yeah, you have to contact local communities.
I was just thinking that one of the things that we realized is that the students who do very well in tech, they usually have done the kind of research that maddog was talking about. And they know where to find these communities. So if you're a beginner and you're just starting off, you always have your own peers who have been doing this maybe for 1 year more or 2 years more. And you can just meet them in the hallway and ask them, which open source communities are you part of? What did you find very helpful? Because I know that everybody has to do a project at some stage in their learning journey, and you have to choose a good project. And very often you can get great ideas from looking at what's happening in the open source community. So use all the resources you have available to find out where you should be lurking, but be prepared for lots of great surprises. There's actually no better way to learn than to learn from other people, practically doing things, outside of the lecture hall or outside of doing exercises online or whatever. You're actually involved in a real life project that can make a big difference to people's lives. So it's quite inspirational also to actually join those projects and see that whatever your contribution is, you're making a difference. So I really encourage you to go there.
Yeah, awesome. Just connect to other people is awesome to start point. So our audience is wondering how they can start joining to the open source movement without quitting their jobs?
Well, a lot of it depends on what job you have, but the thing is, so a lot of people think, well, if I'm going to join the open source community, I have to give up everything I've been doing and switch over all of a sudden. And this is really not the way of doing it. The way of doing it is to look for open source applications that you might use on your existing system. And so you can still write documents using LibreOffice that other people can read using Microsoft Office. But what you're doing is, number one, you're not using a licensed per copy paid piece of software. And number two, you're participating more in the open source community. Likewise, you use an open source browser like Firefox, or Firefox is probably one of the best known, instead of a more proprietary browser like Edge or, God help us, Safari. And so you tend to lose more and more free software. If you're starting a new project, let's say you want to have a web server, use an open source web server. Use open source every place you can into doing your project. Because number one, this will reduce the cost of your project overall. And number two, it will make sure that your project happens faster than trying to have to purchase and use closed source products. People don't buy products. They don't buy computers. They don't buy operating systems. They buy solutions to a problem. And if people wanted to communicate with one another and they could do that with 2 tin cans and a string, they would. But it just so happens that computers are better at doing that. So, people are really trying to solve problems. And you can solve problems as well or better with free software than you can with closed source proprietary software.
Maddog, I like what you're saying, but I also hear where people may be coming from. They may be like, my boss doesn't understand anything about open source. They were trained on this awful proprietary solution, and they feel nervous when I mention like OS Geo or something. You imagine that you're doing some surveying and you have options in terms of open source solutions, but your boss has never heard of these things and could be very nervous about them. I think that what Maddog said about choosing your level of engagement is really important. You are not going to try and convert everybody where you work to use an open source solution if they're nervous of it. However, you have an obligation to yourself as a professional to constantly be pushing the boundaries of your own knowledge and preparing yourself for that next job, which is going to pay so much more. So you are going to have to make that, assess where you will find that balance, how many hours you will spend developing yourself as a professional, and always keeping in mind that, frankly, if you just stick to being a user of other people's technology, you're never going to be as powerful as somebody who is already starting to create and adapt technologies to what is necessary for their environment. And that is, for me, the real beauty of open source. We don't want in our developing countries to be importing solutions that have been tailored for a completely different environment. We want to create technologies that suit our needs. And so you, even if you're in a very uncomfortable slot at the moment, in terms of your management not being aware, you are preparing yourself for that career. So don't allow yourself to be limited, even if you cannot contribute as many hours as you would like to the community at this particular stage due to some of those constraints. And I don't know, Vicky, if you've experienced that, or maddog, you want to come in a little bit. You know, I have had former students of mine who have found themselves in the banking sector babysitting technology, where they're just like, ooh, what was that? And then you send a message off to the HQ somewhere in Europe or in the US, and you're not actually doing anything with the technology. If you stay in those kind of jobs, you're really condemning yourself to never developing. I don't know what you want to say on that.
Well, I mean, it is certainly the case that your career development is your responsibility. It is not necessarily, while your manager should be helping you with it, that is their job. It's not to bean count and micromanage. It is to help you be successful in providing value to the company. And that includes helping you grow in your position. You can't rely on them doing that because most managers don't have training and don't know how to do that. So your career development is in your hands. You must do that. But it does not have to be during work hours. And no, I'm not asking you necessarily to take on a second job to do this. You're already doing things outside of work. You are taking care of your family. You are taking care of your life. You're probably volunteering. Maybe you go to church. Maybe you're a part of a club. You can bring open source solutions into these spheres as well. Like maddog said, you can use a free and open source software browser in your own personal life. And then if you find something that you want it to do differently, you can build an extension for Firefox and release it as open source, right? That's something you can do with a free and open source solution that you can't with others. Do you work for a nonprofit? Every nonprofit needs a website. Every nonprofit needs tooling to get their job done. You can bring in open source solutions, and then the nonprofit saves money by not having to pay for a proprietary software solution for that. You know, you still have to pay for the hosting perhaps, but we always have to pay for hosting. There's no escaping that. You know, so there are ways to do this. Are you civically minded? Are you a member of an organization within your community that helps, say, do disaster response, or that is working on voting or anything like that? There are projects out there that you can bring in. You can bring in things like Ushahidi, which is built specifically to bring communities together and to help have oversight over things like disaster response, over voting management, over things like that. So you don't necessarily have to give up your day job to do this. You can do it in the work outside of that. But we also have to be realistic here and recognize that having the free time to participate in these things, that is a massive privilege, right? A lot of people don't have that ability because they do have to take care of their family. They might be working multiple jobs. They might be going to school and working at the same time. You know, just be realistic, right? Look at realistically what you are doing in your life as a human being. What are your responsibilities, your duties? And do you have the free time to do this? If you don't right now, it is okay. Free and open source software will be there after you've taken care of your responsibilities. It will always be there for you. But it's something you can keep in the back of your mind. And if you can start moving it into your life as a user, as using it for your browser, for your web server, for things like that, these are ways that might have minimal impact on the other things you're doing in your life, and you're still contributing by being a productive user of free and open source software. And you're still learning by learning how to set up these new pieces of software, by how to use these new pieces of software. So there are opportunities, but do be realistic and don't beat yourself up if you have other things you need to do. We're human, it's okay. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, but also, if you can, then you can start to find ways to fit open source around these things and inside of these things. That can be really, really fulfilling.
I would like to say something about convincing management to use open source or free software. When open source and free software first started out, which was actually back in 1986 with the Free Software Foundation, and even beyond that, there were people who questioned, why should I be using software that's not produced by a big company like Microsoft or Oracle? Where am I going to get support? Is this stuff stable? Is it useful? And over time, more and more companies started using it and realizing, yes, this is quality software. And there were other companies that started up and said, well, we will sell you support just like Microsoft would sell you support. So if you go to the sites like Red Hat or SUSE or some of the other large distributions or IBM, you will find case studies that say, oh, we used open source software and we saved this much money, or it's been wonderful, and these are from companies and banks and governments, just like yours. So, if you say, well, your management is hesitating because they'll say, well, we want to have a software contract so that we can call somebody in case this breaks. There are companies that sell software contracts for free software. And believe me, they're just as effective as the companies who make the proprietary software and also sell you a support contract. So, you can use case studies, you can find out. Birds of a feather flock together. So, if you have, say, your management, which is part of banking, and they go to a bankers conference, all they have to ask is, how many people in the bankers conference are using free software? And I guarantee you, there will be 25% or 30% hands go up. And if they don't go up, it's simply because they don't know that they're using free software. They are using free software.
So using free software or open source software is a way to contribute to the open source community, the open hardware, and the free culture. That's the first step. If you can't do it on your job, you can do it in your personal time or in your personal life. And that's the way, at least, I start to contribute. I start to use it myself. So we still have a couple of minutes. So Nicolas is wondering if companies are using open source as a mean to make money. Do you think it's still important in a more idealistic way, in a more philosophical way, to share and learn with other people?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
In fact, one of the best ways that anybody can learn something is to try and explain it to somebody else. Because before you do that, you say, oh, yes, I think I know that. I'm pretty sure I know that. I may know that. And you don't know it. But when you have to explain it to somebody else and they start asking you questions about it, that's when you really know it.
Yeah, but I think that touching on the whole ideological, the foundation of capitalism versus a more communitarian sharing kind of economy. And I think that we are seeing more and more people are realizing that given the nature of the challenges that we are facing today, the only way that we're going to succeed is if we are sharing knowledge openly. And I will just give you the example of what happened with COVID and open science and the whole sharing of knowledge around how to combat the pandemic has really reinvigorated the open science community. And we're seeing a whole lot of new projects trying to address significant global issues by pooling the knowledge of scientists around the world, sharing openly without thinking about which patent, which copyright, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that at an ideological level, we could not be in a more important space than we are at present. People who, for many years, have resisted this are now realizing that we don't have a choice. This is the only way we are going to be able to move forward. I don't know what you think, Vicky.
Yeah, I would love to build on that. I mean, one of the metaphors I use frequently when I speak to people about, free and open source software is one of academia and science, where research, yes, there is this kind of greedy capitalistic aspect where you have to pay a lot to get the access to the journals which contain the research. But research has, from the beginning of science, always been published. So other scientists can read it and learn from it and build upon it. And that is how you move science forward, by standing on the shoulders of those who came before you, right? This is just what we do. As human beings, we've always done this. How do you learn how to cook new foods? How do you learn how to make new mechanical objects? How do you learn how to sew or knit or anything like that in a different way? Well, you build on what came before you. Free and open source software allows you to do that in a way that proprietary software does not, because you can see the source and you can see what happens, and then you can tweak something and change it and make it different and better and fit your purpose. And that's, that's not ideology, that's just logic, right? That's just the way we move things forward as human beings, is together as a species. We learn things, we teach them, we move forward because we're sharing them together. So
but
that's something,
time,
yeah.
Vicky, maddog has some great lectures on the business models that still allow you to share. They allow you to share knowledge and at the same time build great companies that can look after your family, that can, create huge impact. So it's not a question of,
well, this is
if
what
I'm
I do for a
sharing,
living.
I can't make money.
Right. This is what I do for a living, is I do corporate strategy around free and open source software. How can I, as a company, be more successful in a financial way through free and open source software, by using, building, and contributing to free and open source software? How is that going to help my bottom line? And now it's very important to realize that open source is not a business model. It's a development model. It is never a business model. Business models are different things. You don't make money by giving something away. You make money by giving something away and then charging for instance, support or hosting or what have you. That's where you make money, by providing value to your customers. So the commercial side of things, that's the business models. The development model, the clientele model, right? The community model, that's the open source side. And that's where we are continually moving forward, is by sharing this with others in a way that other people can build upon it. So yeah, business is capitalism. It has its problems, but right now it pays the bills to keep the roofs over our heads, so to speak. So it's what we've got to work with. But free and open source software can work in parallel with and in lockstep with, and can work really well to help support those things, just as the commercial ventures can help to support open source.
See, yes.
Economic models are another very long subject.
Oh, yes.
And I think that what all three of us are saying is that there are many business models that can encompass free software, free and open source software, many different ways of doing it. And the best thing is to develop a business model that allows you to use free and open source software, but at the same time allows you to make money. And that's fine. And there's many different models of doing that. So that this probably would be a nice talk to give at CISARMY back in November, or in October when you when you give the longer presentations.
Yeah. So we can say that sharing is human nature, and with or without profit, it's a big deal here. So I have Marcos have a question about your early days. How was for all of you starting on the open source, open hardware, and free culture? What changed since you start, and where do you think that the future goes for open source, open hardware, and free culture?
Let's let Vicky go first because I know she has a meeting coming up.
Yeah, I do need to take off. It's actually a doctor's appointment that I'll need to take off for. Everything has changed since the early days because, I was born in 1972 before free and open source software. And I know I might be, I know I'm a little younger than our friend maddog here, but I know that most of us have probably been around since before the start of free and open source software. So we have seen it all change. And that's something that I think people who are younger than we are, they don't know what it's like before the internet. We do. And it's just, you cannot imagine how massive. Of that. And when I started, it was just free software.
We're back.
Right? And I actually started more on the free culture side of things with Project Gutenberg, because you could find all of these amazing texts for free online, and I found them using Gopher. I don't know if you're familiar with Gopher, but look it up. It's on Wikipedia. I find that Project Gutenberg using Gopher, and that led me to Internet Archive. Way back in the day when Brewster was just starting it out. And that led me to news groups about free culture and then free software. And eventually we got to open source, and it just, watching all these things change and evolve has just been absolutely fascinating. And being a part of that has been just, I just can't express how honored I've been to be able to be a part of that. And free and open source software literally has changed the world in just astonishing ways. And it will continue to do so as we continue to build it and grow it and evolve it in such a way that we can free more and more stuff. I mentioned the research that's locked up behind, paywalls. What can we do to help free that and have more open research, like Dorothy talked about? What can we do to promote more open hardware by using things like crowd supply, which is Kickstarter, but for free and open source hardware, right? That's a really great way to promote open hardware. What can we open up next? What else can we do? We have AI and ML that's coming out now and is really starting to get a lot of adoption. How can we make sure that remains free and respectful of people's data, people's right, people's privacy? How can we, as free and open source software advocates, what can we do to keep things as open and accessible to more people as possible? How can we reach out and translate more things? How can we make sure it's available to screen readers? And how can we make sure that there are, things available for people who are sight impaired? What can we do to open up these vistas to more and more people? There's so much that we in free and open source software have done, but we still got a lot of work to do. And that's why I'm really, really glad to have all of these people who are just starting their free and open source software journeys here today, because it's we're going to be gone. We'll be retired, or we will be dead, or we will just
Hey.
Stop that talk.
And many of us, we have to admit the fact that we won't be around forever. What can we do to help set up free and open source software for success? And it's by helping people like you in the audience to learn and to grow and to understand free and open source software, so we can all move it forward together now while we are all together. I'll shut up now. I kind of held forth on that one, sorry.
Dorothy?
Anyway, I came into open source completely by accident, I can say. I was running an institute. I had paid, I didn't pay, but somebody had invested $2 million in the technology that we were using to keep the institute running as a center of excellence. And I realized that the proprietary solution that I was using kept failing. And when it failed, the whole institute would be ground to a halt. People had paid me fees. I had many big government projects that we were working on. I couldn't afford to have my team frozen because I had a lousy proprietary solution. In the meantime, I was running a supercomputer, and the supercomputer, which was running on Linux, didn't have these kind of problems. So I called my technical team and I'm like, why are we using this proprietary solution, which keeps freezing, when we have more or less all the admin functions that we need and that we're familiar with because we're running the supercomputer as well? And they said, yeah, we can shift everything to open source. So now I had 2 vice presidents flying in, one from South Africa, one from London, telling me, oh, we are so sorry. We know we have a lousy proprietary solution. We will do better in future. And I'm saying, relax. I don't need you to do better. I have something better right now. And so for the whole period that I was the Director General, at least for all our backend, we stuck to only open source solutions. And we enjoyed it. It was effective. It was wonderful. But I want to say, in relation to what has changed, when we started out, maybe 20 years back, there was a lot of hostility. You could see people who were trying to sell proprietary solutions extremely nervous about the open source community, because the open source community was where all the innovation was happening. And you know, each time you see proprietary companies having to steal an innovation from the open source community and implement it in their particular offerings. Now things have changed, and you see that many proprietary companies are actively supporting open source communities, and they've more or less integrated it into their proprietary solutions. So that's very different. And then the other thing that I will say is I do a lot of work with UNESCO, and UNESCO, for example, has adopted only open licenses for all its work. It actually, you know, anything that is published by UNESCO is published with an open license. It actively promotes open education resources. It actively promotes open science. And when UNESCO does that, that means that it gets the member states of UNESCO, more than 190 of them, to think about these things so that public policy in those countries will change.
Dorothy?
And
we have only 2 more minutes, so...
okay, let maddog come in then. So that just tells you how things are changing.
Okay, so I started programming in 1969. So Vicky, that was 4 years before you were born.
3.
Oh, 3, okay. But back in those days, there really was no such thing as closed source software, because people were not professional programmers. They were people who were writing code to solve their own problems. And when they got finished with it, they said, what am I going to do with this? You know, I'm not in the business of selling software.
1 minute,
So they would contribute this to other people. And my whole professional life has been having access to the source code so I could change it, learn from it, use it, and I eventually ended up working with Linux.
Thank you. Oh, that was awesome to have you here, guys. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, maddog. I'm so sorry that the time is tiring here in the live, but I'm pretty happy to have you here. It's been an honor, and it's been my pleasure to have you here. So thank you.
Thank you for hosting this. It's very good. And
Thank you also.
Thank you, Vicky and Dorothy, for your contributions. They were great.
And you too, Mad Dog.
All right.
See you all
Yes.
soon.
Good night.
Good night.
Vamos a nerdear. Vamos a
Bueno, gente, muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos en el Container A, sponsoreado por Falabella el día de hoy. Los esperamos mañana, no se lo pierdan por nada del mundo. Va a haber un montón de actividades por nuestros sponsors. Y muchísimas gracias, Peu, por acompañarnos también.
Sí, gracias por bancarme. Y súper agradecida de estar acá. Gracias a la producción, en serio. Esto no está en el guión. Gracias, en serio, fueron un amor. Y bueno, mañana espero que disfruten mucho de la nerdearla. Va a estar... Hay una parte nueva que es la de testing. Esa va a estar muy buena para la gente que le interesa ese tema de testing, que bueno, no se habla tanto de eso. Así que presten atención y bueno, muchas gracias.
Y sigan a nerdearla en todos lados para enterarse de toda la información para el día.